Hello, today I'm with Chen. Dr. Chen's research focuses on the intersection of climate change, air pollution, and human health, and he's an associate editor at JACC. At Yale, he's an associate professor of epidemiology and co-faculty director of the Yale Center for Climate Change and Health. Today, I want to talk a bit about a paper, an editorial page that we put out together in response to the wildfires in Los Angeles. First, I wanted to welcome you and thank you for being here. I wanted to ask you a little bit about wildfire smoke to start, because people think about the haze, they think about air quality and pollution, but wildfire smoke is actually worse than that. And this has been the focus of some of your study. I wonder if you can just tell us a little bit about wildfire smoke and its effects on health.
Thanks, Harlan. So first of all, thanks for having me, and thanks for inviting me to the big JACC family. It's my great pleasure. And in terms of the ongoing devastating wildfire events in Los Angeles, we have seen some the air quality goes to really high. And what kind of concerns us most is what's within this wildfire smoke. And in particular, there's a particle we call it a fine particulate matter. It is literally just 20 or 30 times smaller than a normal human hair. Because it's so small and it also contains a lot of mixture of toxic components like hazardous organic compounds, they can actually go deeper into the lung and then penetrate into the blood system, then circulate around the body. And they could lead to increased systematic inflammation on oxidative stress, leading to vascular dysfunctions. So they could lead to acute increased risk for many cardiovascular events like heart attack. And what we have learned from the past working on the wildfire smoke is that the potential impact from this wildfire smoke is beyond what we possibly have known before. For example, last year we have done a study showing that every year in the US, actually, there are more than 10,000 people potentially died due to these wildfire smoke events. And that impacts goes way beyond the Western coast, because another unique feature of the wildfire smoke is that it can travel hundreds of miles away. We actually, in the East Coast, see the first-hand evidence in 2023. In June, we see the sky in New York City turns orange. That was because the wildfire smoke from Canada travels all the way to the East Coast.
That's something. Of course, our hearts go out to all these people who are experiencing this acute damage. I mean, the fire has caused such harm, and so many of us know people who've lost their homes and are in such distress. So, these don't occur in isolation. In our piece, we talked about these compound events where this isn't just about fire, but it's about other things, droughts. And you've been seeing, as a person who studies climate change, this all occurring together. Can you just elaborate a little bit on what's been going on in the world and these compound events, how these are all compounding together?
Yes, thanks, Colin. So this event is still unfolding, and unfortunately, we actually see this event does not happen alone. As a matter of fact, as we're speaking, it turns out 2024 was the warmest year on record. So, the whole world reached about 1.5 degrees Celsius, compared to the pre-industrial level. And with climate warming, and we have indeed seen more and more extreme weather events like wildfires happening more frequently. And last year in the US alone, we have what we call billion-dollar disasters in the US. There are 27 of them, including wildfires, but also droughts and also floods. And all these extreme events, they do not act alone on our health. So taking the Los Angeles wildfire, for example, preceding to this wildfire event, Southern California has been in the drought conditions for a long time. And the drought conditions, in brief, they just provide more dry fuel to the wildfire. So when the wildfire happens, it happens more intensely. So these kind of events are what we call compounding events. So that means multiple events they could happen either at the same time or happen one by another. And then when they do, they can interact with each other and potentially leading to much larger health risks. So I think, when we are dealing with these single events, we also need to be mindful of the serious events happening behind and also potential what's in the future with a warming climate.
So, Kai, you've also studied the timing of risk. People get an exposure to wildfire smoke. The wildfire smoke doesn't just cause problems immediately, but sometimes long term. You've mentioned the inflammation and all the things that can happen with regard to vascular damage. We as cardiologists are seeing our patients. What do we need to be aware of with regard to the timing of the risk once an exposure occurs with wildfire smoke? Does most of that risk occur very shortly after the exposure? And so, we're seeing more people at that moment in the emergency departments, or is there a tail to that risk also?
Yeah, Harlan. So, the risk really stays. So what we see from some of our preliminary studies and many others around the world is that there is a long-term impacts to this, what we call repeated exposure to the Wi-Fi smoke. So I want to break this down into two parts. One is really the long-term consequences of exposing to this extreme high level of Wi-Fi smoke pollutants. The second part is that for many people in the nation and around the world, we actually exposed to the Wi-Fi smoke, although in a relatively low level, but for a much longer time period. So when we look at this long-term exposure to the relatively low level of Wi-Fi smoke, what are the cardiovascular health consequences? So these are some of the answers that we try to answer, but also in terms of, when we're looking at Wi-Fi smoke, it's not only just about the timing, but also about the intensity, right? So if you look at the Wi-Fi, maybe there's a small Wi-Fi events compared to a larger Wi-Fi events. They produce different amounts of pollutants, but also very likely different chemical compositions of these Wi-Fis. So these are the questions we need to study in the future research. But in terms of, for the clinical community, I think this is something that not generally embodied in the current risk assessment or guideline for cardiovascular risk. So I think when we look at these type of events, the first thing I think could be done is to anticipate and with what are the potential cardiovascular health risks coming. So we first need to know what's coming to the cardiovascular health burden, and then paired with the current strategies that we can do, try to reduce and mitigate that risk.
So we might need to be aware more that in future months there may be spikes in risk across time, even though the fire occurred now, right?
Exactly. And
So one of the things that you've been doing, I mean, first of all, people should know we brought you into JACC. Because you're an outstanding scientist, but also because of the topics that you study. Increasingly, climate change is going to be very important for cardiovascular specialists. We are going to be encountering risks that are caused by a warming planet, but by also the catastrophic events that can occur around that, the weather events that we're already seeing. Kai, I wonder if you could just talk for a moment. We've been focusing on wildfire smoke, but your research is also broader than that. We've brought in also other consultants, experts from around the world in cardiovascular disease and in these environmental events. Actually, there's a field emerging, right? I mean, it's really environmental cardiology that people are talking about now. I wonder if you could just talk for a moment about how this is all coming together, the importance of science in this area.
Thanks, Harlan, and thank you for elevating the whole what we call the environmental cardiology field. So what you just mentioned climate change. Climate change is really a risk multiplier, and it impacts cardiovascular and many other organ systems through these extreme weather events, including Wi-Fi, including heat wave, including cold spells, including air pollution, and many other things. And recently in JACC, we've been very fortunate to work with some of the excellent researchers in the field to publish research on heat, on cold impacts, on heart attacks, on stroke, but also on air pollution, including particulate matter pollution, ozone pollution, and many others. So we think this is really a field that's emerging, and more research is being done, try to understand better not only about the relationship between how climate change can amplify cardiovascular health, but also what are the potential strategies, who are the most vulnerable populations that we can do from both clinical perspective, but also public health perspective. What are the best options that we can do with evidence, with scientific evidence?
And just getting to risk mitigation, because we touch on this in our editor's page. Let's just go back to Los Angeles. Is there anything people can do to help themselves? What can people do to mitigate? What should clinicians be telling their patients who come to them and say, what can I do to protect my health in the midst of this kind of catastrophe?
Thanks, Harlan. So we just mentioned the Wi-Fi smoke is particularly dangerous. So people should be aware of the ways to reduce risk. The first option is something that we become familiar with due to the COVID-19 pandemic, is the N95 respirator, the N95 masks. So these really have the efficiency in filtering out all the small particles. So that's first option. Second option is to use some of the high efficiency filters in both your cars or at home. If you don't have one, there are ways to build a low-cost kind of clean air filter at your home. So these are the options that people can take. But I just want to kind of echo what you mentioned before. The environmental impacts on the cardiology is beyond just the air. It also with the ash we saw after the fire. It also comes to the water quality. So with everything burning, all the toxic pollutants goes down into the water system. So be extremely aware of the water, the air, the ash, the soil. So these are things that people should be in mind. And especially after the Wi-Fi, people say, oh, there's no Wi-Fi, there's no smoke, can I go back home safely? I think these are the things people should be aware of. And also for clinicians, we know that after these events, there will be increased risk for cardiovascular disease. So what are the proactive measures that we can take, like mobile care units or pre-screening for some certain vulnerable populations that we know of? For example, older adults with certain pre-existing conditions, they may be more vulnerable to the Wi-Fi smoke. So what are the ways that we can better prepare them in order to reduce the potential risk of cardiovascular events? So I think these are the things from the public and from the clinical community can do.
We'll be getting back to this quite a bit as the science emerges. And thank you so much, Kai, for such important information.
Thank you, Harlan.